by Sharon Creech, Chapter 4. That's what I'm telling you. On the day that Phoebe sat next to me at lunch and told me I was ever so brave, she invited me to her house for dinner that night. Sure, I said. To be honest, I was relieved that I would not have to eat at Margaret's again. I did not want to see Dad and Margaret smiling at each other. I knew that Margaret and her elderly mother, Mrs. Partridge, were trying their best to make me feel welcome, but they were a bit odd, and I was feeling sad and ordinary all the time. I wanted everything to be like it was. I wanted to be back in Bybanks, Kentucky, in the hills and the trees near the cows and chickens and pigs. I wanted to run down the hill from the barn and through the kitchen door that banged behind me and see my mother and my father sitting at the table peeling apples. Phoebe and I walked home from school together. We stopped briefly at my house so that I could call my father at work. Margaret had helped him find a job selling farm machinery. When I phoned him that day, he said it made him happy as a clam at high water to know I had a new friend. Maybe this is really why he was happy, I thought. Or maybe it was because he could be alone with Margaret Cadaver. Phoebe and I then walked to her house. As we passed Margaret Cadaver's house, a voice called out, "Sal, Sal, is that you?" Phoebe put her hand up to her mouth and said, "Oh." In the shadows on the porch, Margaret's mother, Mrs. Partridge, sat in a wicker rocker. A thick, gnarled cane with a handle carved in the shape of a cobra's head lay across her knees. Her purple dress had slipped up over her bony knees, which were spread apart, and I hate to say you could see right up her skirt. Around her neck was a yellow feather scarf. My boa, she once told me, my most favorite boa. As I started up the walk, Phoebe pulled on my arm. "Don't go up there," she said. "It's only Mrs. Partridge," I said. "Come on." "Who's that with you?" Mrs. Partridge said. "What's that on her face?" I knew what she was going to do. She did this with me the first time I met her. Phoebe placed her hands on her own brown face and felt about. "Is it beans? Is it beans from that red bean salad I had at lunch?" "Come here," Mrs. Partridge said. She wriggled her crooked little fingers at Phoebe. Phoebe looked at me and I pushed her a little closer. Mrs. Partridge put her fingers up to Phoebe's face and mashed around gently over her eyelids and down her cheeks. Then she said, "Just as I thought, it's two eyes, a nose, and a mouth." Then she laughed a wicked laugh that sounded as if it was bouncing off jagged rocks. "You're 13 years old." "Yes," Phoebe said. "I knew it," Mrs. Partridge said. "I just knew it." She patted her yellow feather boa. "This is Phoebe Winterbottom," I said. "She lives right next door to you." When we left, Phoebe whispered, "I wish you hadn't done that. I wish you hadn't told her I lived next door." "Why not?" "You don't seem to know Mrs. Cadaver and Mrs. Partridge very well." "They haven't lived there very long, only a month or so." "Don't you think it's remarkable that she guessed your age like that?" "I don't see what's so remarkable about it," Phoebe said. Before I could explain, she started telling me about the time that she and her mother, father, and sister Prudence had gone to the state fair. They went to a booth where a crowd was gathered around a tall, thin man. "So, what was he doing?" I asked. "That's what I'm telling you," Phoebe said. Phoebe had a way of sounding like a grown-up sometimes. When she said, "That's what I'm telling you," she sounded like a grown-up talking to a child. All around, people were saying, "Oh," and "amazing," and "how does he do that?" What he was doing was guessing people's ages. He had to guess your correct age within 1 year, or else you won a teddy bear. "How did he do it?" he asked. "That's what I'm telling you," Phoebe said. The thin man would look someone over carefully, close his eyes, and then he would point his finger at the person and shout, "72." At everyone? He guessed everyone to be 72? "Sal," she said, "that's what I'm trying to tell you. I was just giving you an example. He might have said 10 or 30 or 72. It just depended on the person. He was astounding. I really thought it was more astounding that Mrs. Partridge could do this, but I didn't say anything. Phoebe said that her father wanted the thin man to guess his age. My father thinks he looks very young for his age, and he was certain he could fool the man. After studying my father closely, the thin man closed his eyes, pointed his finger at my father, and shouted, 52. My father gave a little cry of astonishment, and all around, people were automatically beginning to say, oh, and amazing, and all that. But my father stopped them. Why did he do that? Phoebe started pulling on one of her yellow curls. I think she was wishing she hadn't started this story in the first place, because he wasn't anywhere near 52. He was only 38. Oh, I said. And all day long my father followed us through the fair, carrying his prize, a large green teddy bear. He was miserable. He kept saying, 52? 52? Do I look 52? Does he? I said. Phoebe pulled harder on her hair. No, he does not look 52. He looks 38. She was very defensive about her father. Phoebe's mother was in the kitchen baking pies. On the counter were 2 cartons of blackberries. I couldn't keep my eyes off the blackberries. Mrs. Winterbottom said, I'm making blackberry pie. I hope you like blackberries. Is there something wrong? Really, if you don't like blackberries, I could. No, I said, I like blackberries very much. I just have some allergies, I think. To blackberries? Mrs. Winterbottom said. Oh no, not to blackberries. The truth is, I do not have allergies, but I could not admit that the sight of blackberries reminded me of my mother. Mrs. Winterbottom made me and Phoebe sit down at the kitchen table and tell her about our day. She brought out a plate of homemade cookies. Phoebe told her about Mrs. Partridge guessing her age. She's really remarkable, I said. Phoebe said, It's not that remarkable, Sal. I wouldn't exactly use the word remarkable. But Phoebe, I said, Mrs. Partridge is blind. Both Phoebe and her mother said, Blind? Later, Phoebe said to me, Don't you think it's odd that Mrs. Partridge, who is blind, could see something about me? But I, who can see, was blind about her. And speaking of odd, there was something very odd about Mrs. Cadaver. Margaret, I said. Is that her name? Margaret Cadaver? Mrs. Margaret Cadaver? Yes. She scares me half to death, Phoebe said. Why? That's what I'm telling you, she said. First, there is that name, Cadaver. You know what cadaver means. Actually, I did not. It means dead body. Are you sure? I said. Of course I am sure, Sal. You can check the dictionary if you want. Do you know what she does for a living? What her job is? Yes, I was pleased to say. I was pleased to know something. She's a nurse. Exactly, Phoebe said. Would you want a nurse whose name meant dead body? And that hair. Don't you think all that sticking out red hair is spooky? And that voice. It reminds me of dead leaves all blowing around on the ground. This was Phoebe's power. In her world, no one was ordinary. People were either perfect, like her father, or, more often, they were weird lunatics or axe murderers. She could convince me of just about anything, especially about Margaret Cadaver. From that day on, Margaret Cadaver's hair did look spooky, and her voice did sound exactly like dead leaves. Somehow, it was easier to deal with Margaret if there were reasons not to like her, and I definitely did not want to like her. Do you want to know an absolute secret? Phoebe said. I did. Promise not to tell. I promise. Maybe I shouldn't, she said. Your father goes over there all the time. Your father likes her, doesn't he? Yes, probably. Maybe. I won't say then. She twirled her finger through her curly hair and let those big blue eyes roam over the ceiling. Her name is Mrs. Cadaver, right? Have you ever wondered what happened to Mr. Cadaver? I never really thought about it. Well, I think I know, Phoebe said, and it is awful, purely awful.